Well, hello everybody. Welcome to my chat on, hang on, sorry. All right, everything seems to be working. All right, so welcome to my chat on paper trimmers. So today I am going to answer the question, is there a perfect trimmer? And before I get too far, I'm going to show you my pile of trimmers that I have tried and tried and tried to find the perfect trimmer, and it hasn't happened yet. I'm going to be honest. All right, so look at these trimmers. I have bought and tried all of these trimmers so you don't have to. No, that's not why, but actually, so in the crafty tool world, all the companies love to come out with trimmers. We are Memory Keepers, Tonic, which is Tim Holtz brand. We've got Caterpillars. We've got Fiskars. So as far as I'm concerned, the Fiskars is kind of the OG, the original one. Now, that's more because I've been crafting for, let's see, since I got married. So I actually got into, hi guys, thank you for joining me for my crafty chat. I actually got started in crafting shortly after I got married. My first scrapbook layout was of my dog, and I used the Fiskars, probably this one, a good old simple Fiskars track trimmer, and decorative scissors, as we all did back in the day, and had a great time with it. So let me grab some paper here. Dun, dun, dun. That's going to be kind of important for showing some of how these things work. Okay, so over the years, different, obviously, paper or trimmers as such existed long before the crafting community, but what they did was they sort of decided to make them accessible to us by making them smaller, profile, so there aren't those big things that you used to see in the schools, things that we could take along to our crops and tuck into our bags, just sort of make them useful for the average Joe is what they've done. So Fiskars is kind of the OG. What is the benefit of a good old Fiskars? So these are known what I call a track cutter. So these blades need to be replaced. So you can buy these separately, and you'll pop one out and you'll pop one in. The other neat thing about the Fiskars is that they have color-coded blades. So this blade here is orange, and then there's another one that's black. And what it does is it's a scoring blade. So what'll happen is instead of obviously cutting, it will score for your cards. So if you don't happen to have a score board, you can always use your trimmer. Okay, so that's sort of the huge benefit of the track tool. Then, of course, the disadvantage is that these blades do need to be replaced. And then the other thing that sometimes happens, if you find your track trimmer isn't working, you need to pay attention to this divot that they have built into. Yes, hardly ever use my Fiskars anymore. I'm all about the Tim Holtz rotary. Yes, I will talk about the Tim Holtz rotary because it's awesome. Okay, so anyway, you got to worry about apparently I didn't turn off my alarm. Okay, so you got to worry about paper getting jammed into there and cleaning it out. Some tracks actually have replacement pads that you can pull out and replace as they get sort of chewed up. Okay, so just as an overview, we're going to talk about the track ones. We're going to talk about rotary. So I have a Caterpillar crop, and I also have the Tim Holtz tonic. So these are basically the exact same trimmer. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about those. Then what we're going to talk about is what I call a guillotine. So this is a guillotine, so it's got the arm that goes up and down. So we'll talk about those. And then finally, I will go into a little bit about specialty tools, which would be this all-in-one, which actually could have its own Crafty tool talk all by itself. And then there is the specialty. This one is a decal edge, which kind of replaces those OG decal scissors. So we'll talk about whether you would want one of these in your stash. Okay, so back to track. So on top of Fiskars, yes, Jennifer. Jennifer's saying, I'm finding the blades don't last nearly as long anymore. Not sure if it's the quality of the blades or if I'm using thicker paper that's harder on the trimmers. So let's talk about that for a second. So with the track, some of the things that can go wrong are, and I see it actually happening to this one here. You can see that this track is very deep and paper is getting stuck. Little bits of paper is getting stuck inside there. And that will actually affect your cut, the cleanness of your cut. Again, this is the tonic, same as the Fiskars in the sense that it's the track. And then this one also has replaceable blades that you're going to have to replace. So you've got, in this case, this one is your cutter. Now know that on the Fiskars, the black is your score. On tonic, the black is your cutter. And then, of course, your score blades. So you got a bit of an all-in-one for your card making and scoring, okay? So usually what I do when I'm actually storing it is I do actually keep the blades on there. And then I'll pop off the one that I'm not using. And now I'm ready to go. So in all cases with the track, they have this, this arm that you have to kind of push up. And then you load your paper in. Now, so the one thing to think about in trimmers, and this is something I think to think about mostly in track trimmers, is whether they have measurement on both sides of the track. So there is always a cutting spot. So the line, right? This is where the line is going to go. On a rotary, it's on the side. On the track, you've got room on your platform on either side. So sometimes when you're loading your paper, if you're doing smaller cuts, this can be very handy to allow yourself, and this is one of the reasons why I love a track cutter and having one, is because I can do precise cuts on both sides of my paper. So now I can get these small, fine, straight cuts, right? That can be a little bit harder on some of the other ones. The other beautiful thing about a track cutter is you'll notice that it's got the measurements along here. So let's suggest that I wanted to cut out a frame instead of edge to edge. I could actually start, and I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on this, but I could start at, say, in this case, I'm starting at 29 centimeters, and then I could go to 4 centimeters, and then I could turn it, line up, and then just kind of go like that. And the beautiful thing is on all of the trimmers, you can see on this one here, there's a little pointer that tells you exactly where the blade is on. So you know exactly where the blade is when you're cutting. That is a lot more difficult when you're using a rotary or a guillotine, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But the point is now with the track, I have a little bit more control over where I'm cutting. Okay, so so pretty much they're the same. The other thing that can happen is you get, now the tonic, what I like about it over the Fiskars has these arms and they go out like that, and that extends your measuring ability out to, well, in this case, 15 inches, which is great because you want more than 12 inches because that's mostly what we're working with is 12 by 12 paper. So what I like about the tonic over the Fiskars, just so you know, is it has both. It has a lower one and a higher one. I tend to actually prefer to orient my paper to the bottom, where I'm actually closest to and reading it. So if you're looking for precise measurements, you actually should stand up and look down on your work. So what I do like about this one is at least it's a little closer, so it's a little more precise than perhaps trying to look at it from an angle to this one. Okay, but at least, you know, I've got both sides. I can use either one the way I want. I know some people actually prefer to use theirs like this. I think I've seen Vicky Booten do that. She prefers to actually orient it this way. So don't be afraid to move your trimmer around and appreciate the way you want to use it. Now I notice Jennifer's mentioning the metal string. So the other thing about the track is that each different track has a way of telling you where the cut line is going to be. So in the Fiskars, I'll see if this, I don't know if I have one that actually has, I know I've had one with the metal string. I'm not sure that I have one right now. Yes, I do. Okay, so this one actually has a metal string that helps first it does a couple of things. Number one, that metal string is a visual line of exactly where you're going to cut. So if I'm cutting out something like a little square around a sentiment and I want that sentiment centered, now I have this string that allows me to eyeball around and know that I'm getting where I want. Or even if I were to have, say, put myself a little line mark on my page and that's exactly where I want to cut, now I know that I can load in my paper, and when I have that string right over top of that little mark, that's exactly where that's going to go. So that's where the Fiskars can be pretty handy too, for some cutting, right? The other thing that this metal string does seem to do is help keep your track on track. Okay, so the one thing that I have heard is that people, even with a paper trimmer, and this goes for all paper trimmers, they sometimes don't get as straight a line as they would like. So if we're talking about precision and perfection, this is kind of another level. So I try to go, I'm on as close to possible, as close to good as you can get, because I don't think people are actually coming up to your scrapbook pages and going, oh, that's not square. What did you do? Right? So, and if they do, I would kick them out of my house and say, you're not welcome back. However, we do strive for us wanting to have as close to straight and square as we possibly can. So what'll happen is if I'm pushing on the track especially as my trimmer gets used and over time, I can actually push my trimmer in a way that creates, I call it a wow. That's what you would call it if you were working with wood, is you kind of push up against the plastic and you can actually end up warping or creating a wow, so that, and what will end up happening is the straight, even though that looks straight, it's not as straight as you would think. And then of course this is where, you know, pushing on it the wrong way is where you can sometimes get some of these ragged edges. So you really want to be careful when you're using your trimmer. Sometimes, I'm just going to be honest here, it's not always the trimmer that's the problem. Sometimes it's how we're using it. So if I reload this paper and just press down straight, but kind of gently pull back and forth, and sometimes I'm going to have to go back and forth a couple times, you can see that's a much cleaner edge than I have from sort of that one where I was kind of actively pushing it to try to get it to go off kilter for us. So that's one thing that can happen. Of course, the other thing that can happen is your blade can wear out. It will wear out. That's why it's replaceable. So, pardon me for a sec. That's true, Gloria. Some papers don't cut as well as either. So sometimes it has everything to do with the paper. But the other thing is sometimes the ability, like I am quite impressed by how well this little track, like this blade is not very big. It's just a little X-Acto knife blade. Now let's pop this out and show you. Maybe. Usually you take it to one side or another, and then you can just, fingernails don't make this the easiest thing. I'm just going to be honest, but did you hear that metal thing? Yeah, of course. Let's try taking this out. Okay. This one should be way easier. Yeah, here it comes. Okay, so this tiny little X-Acto blade, it's a two-sided blade. Okay, this blade really blows my mind about how long it can last and how much it can cut. Now, I'm actually touching this. It should actually cut me. So this is a really old blade. But what I will often do is I will keep an old blade to the side, and something that's more thick, like a chipboard, I will keep this blade and kind of call it my rugged, it's not my precision blade anymore. So I will keep one of these to the side. And then when I'm actually cutting chipboard, surprisingly, this old worn out blade will go through chipboard, but I'm not as worried about a clean cut on chipboard because I'm going to cover it. But it's still pretty impressive how well, you know, just kind of giving it a good shove down and forcing it through the chipboard, an old blade can do wonders for getting through chipboard. And then when I want to do my beautiful cardstock, I would have a separate blade that would be sort of my new blade that I would keep for making sure that I get those nice, precise, clean cuts. Let's see, what else did I want to tell you about track? There's so much I could tell you about these trimmers. But I guess the other thing I was going to say is that this is still a little tiny little blade. So basically, I wouldn't, unless I was using an old blade and cutting chipboard, there is something to be said about making sure that I don't go above, say, cardstock weight when I'm using these kinds of trimmers. They are surprisingly heavy duty, but they're not meant to be, you know, your off-road sort of scenario. Okay, so anyway, like I said, there's lots of great track trimmers that have lots of different features. And I can certainly come back to this if there's more questions, but I'm going to move on for a second and talk about the next one that I'd like to talk about. This is the rotary. Okay, so a rotary trimmer has actually, you can see it better on my cutter tiller. These are exactly the same, okay? And I believe the store carries both. But this is kind of, to me, riffing on the idea of the Quilter's rotary trimmer. So they would have you tried any of the trimmers that are self-sharpening? I think they are rotary. Yes, I'm just going to talk about that right now. Okay, so these are the rotaries. Okay, so rotaries have a circle blade, okay, in a housing that runs along the side track. Okay, so the issue with these, okay, first off, I'm just going to hit it right off the top. The biggest complaint is people don't necessarily get a precise cut. So I'm just going to do it. That wasn't so bad. Maybe I'm doing it naturally. There we go. That's not such a great cut. Okay, what happens with the rotary is and actually the guillotine is it's extremely important to, when you load your paper, give it a slight little press. So if you actually feel it, there's a little bit of back and forth movement on this assembly. And then what'll happen is your blade will run along this other metal ledge that's underneath, and it'll act like scissors cutting the paper. So just like a pair of scissors, where the blade is contacting the other side of the metal piece, it's cutting. Okay, so this actually, so Jennifer, you kind of touched on this. Is it self-sharpening? The idea is yes. You are not supposed to have to replace this rotary trimmer, because the metal on metal is supposed to keep it sharp. Okay, so how I'm actually going to use this though is when I actually put my paper in, I need to kind of give it a slight gentle press. So I might even do it, here, I'll just move this up a little bit. I might even kind of do it like kind of hold my, and just kind of gently press in and then cut. Okay. So that makes for a more precise cut. Whenever we've had people coming in troubleshooting this particular trimmer, it's because they didn't know that little trick where you have to actually push that in just a smidge to get that to first keep it sharp, and secondly to get a cleaner cut. Okay. The one thing about a rotary is thinking about, cutting that frame. I don't have any feedback from this cutter as to where the edge is. Okay. So, and I have to start kind of from the top or the bottom. So you're looking at cutting edge to edge. It is, I won't ever say it's impossible. I'm sure if you held your mouth the right way and were really crafty, you could figure out a way to cut a frame, but I don't think it's particularly easy. The other thing that you need to be aware of is with this little bit of movement, you can create a little bit of a not straight edge. So a couple of things that I do when I'm loading up my rotary is, say I want 4 1/4. So I'm going to put it, I want a 4 1/4 cut. So I'm going to load it up. I'm going to make sure this edge runs. That's the beautiful thing about these Crafty trimmers. They've actually thought about us. They've got measurements here, here, and here, so we can double check. We've also got this scoring in here, and they've even got on some of them common, it's really going to be hard to see on camera, but if you look closely at your trimmer, you can see common card cuts or common crafting cuts. So 4.25 by 5.5. So based on horizontal, based on vertical. So very popular or kind of marked and noted on your cutter. So I'm just going to put this at 4 1/4. But what can happen is, because of this little bit of movement, I could end up, if I'm not being particularly careful, with a really wonky cut. But the key is just to kind of just take your time and just gently push in and do that. Okay. So that's the one thing about the rotary that I really love, is that I can often, if I don't get a cut quite beautiful, I can just move it just a smidgy and then recut again. And then I just get this little bit, and my cut is much, I can clean up a cut. Okay. So that's one thing I do love about my rotary, is that I can fix a cut pretty quickly and easily. Yeah, can't cut a straight line with your guillotine. The guillotine is probably the hardest one. So then we have our guillotine. Okay, so guillotine, I only have a small one. This one's for memory keepers. For guillotine, these remind me of the ones that the teachers had in school. They used to be ginormous, and everybody worried about their fingers. These also are meant to be self-sharpening. Now, back in the day with the big guillotines, they do send them out. This piece can be sent out to be sharpened. I have never done it or had to do it. You could probably take it to some sort of knife sharpening or scissors sharpening place and get it sharpened. But they do last a good long time as is. The other thing is there's no measurement on this side. So you basically have, as for your measurement, just this amount, whatever this platform is giving you for measurements. So like on this one, if I wanted to measure more than 6 inches, I don't have it. It's just up to 6 inches. So this is something to be aware of, is knowing what you're going to cut and how long you want to cut. So that the platform can be a big deal. So I would just load in and then you just push down. So now the guillotine, again, has this little bit of play on the handle that can create a wonky cut. So what I like to do is just kind of gently, not super hard, but gently push in and then go down. What I like about, again, this is similar, is that similar to the rotary, is I can get these nice small mini cuts that can be really nice. But what I don't have is any idea of how long or big this cut piece that I've cut off is, for 2 reasons. One is my paper has come off the side here, so it's over 6 inches. So the only thing that I can do to know how much I'm cutting off is I could mark here. That's at 6. And if I want a 1/4 inch piece, actually, no, hang on. There. If I want a 1/4 inch piece, then what I would do is I would move that notch piece to 1/4 inch. And now I know that that is a 1/4 inch strip. Okay. But I do not have the measurements on this side to help me. Whereas something like this one, if I just want a quick 1/4 inch off the side of my paper, I can load in and I can just move it over. I can eyeball the score line in there. I can check the measurement on the ruler, and I've got my small strip of paper, right? Sometimes, so let's say mathing is hard and I have a bit of a cold, so I'm trying to think a little bit. So this issue here can be why I look for trimmers that have some measuring on one side and a nice long ability to measure on the other side. So I want 12 inches for sure, because at the very least, even if I don't have the ability to tell on this side, I could do some mathing and I can say, okay, okay, so this page is currently at 11 inches and I want this page to be, or I want a strip that is a 1/2 inch, then I can just move this over a 1/2 inch. And then now I can create myself the strip. Okay. Alternatively, I can decide that I want this to be, I need 10 inches of 10 by 9. I can always just mark up to, you know, put my edge up to 10. Now I know I've got a 10-inch wide piece of paper, right? So that can be a little bit more difficult when you don't have as much area to the right or left. So that's, again, another challenge. So so this one only goes till 5. If you're scrapbooking, and then the other thing that'll happen is sometimes on some trimmers, the 6-inch won't be on the arm. It'll actually sit somewhere in here where it's actually not easily measured. So you're kind of guessing between, now luckily this one does. So if I needed a 6-inch piece of paper, I can just load this baby in, go up to 6, cut my paper, I'm lucky. But if it was, say, if I wanted 5.5, so that's a very common cut for card makers, 5.5. So it is in here somewhere. It's not marked very clearly. So now I have to kind of guess. So that can be something that you want to look at, is where the 5.5 or the 6 sits on your platform. I personally like when this, see here, it goes all the way up to 6. In fact, it actually goes up to 6 1/4. The base goes only to 6 in terms of scoring, and then there's this. But this measurement tool at the top goes just past 6, which is why I love this. If I'm going to say I have a favorite trimmer, it is probably this Tonic rotary. I keep all the other ones because I find that there are times when I'll be working on something and a guillotine or a track trimmer just suits my space, suits my what I'm doing just a little bit better. For example, what if I needed a frame? I can't do that on this one. I don't know where the edge is. So, but this one, I can always know that everything, as a card maker, I've got all the good measurements and mat measurements for photos within this platform. Okay, so my paper is going to sit nicely on there. I've got lots of these straight lines to kind of push to orient my paper to help me keep it straight. So all of these little crutches that are right here in this trimmer help me to make sure that my cuts are a lot more straighter. I also love, again, I think I mentioned this, that I have the arm at the top and the arm at the bottom. So depending on how I'm loading my paper, I've got either side I can put my paper up to make sure that I'm getting, or I can, or both. If I want to double check that it's straight, I've got a measurement up here and a measurement up here. If I'm being very precise, I've got that right here on this trimmer. So the guillotine, what I love about it is it's great for small cuts and sentiments. So if I want to cut, you know, little strips, it can be really good. But again, I can't, going above 6 inches. So here, I'm going to cut a 6-inch piece of paper. I want little 1/2-inch strips. Now I got to do, I got to math it backwards. So I want 5 1/2. Now I know I've got a 1/2-inch strip. If I want another 1/2 inch, I got to go to 5, 5 1/2. Easy enough math, but I don't have any way of knowing on this side. So, you know, but I do love a small trimmer once in a while. So yes, it's always the issue. I want to, here, I'm gonna highlight your thoughts, Kim, because you've got it. We want a trimmer that doesn't take up too much real estate on our desk, but it has to have a base of at least 6 inches. 100%. That is exactly right. So, and the other thing is where this, what was I going to say? Where this cuts off here, I think is really important as well. So for small cutting, I will keep this. I'm not getting rid of it by any stretch, but it's probably not my go-to. Okay. Okay. So as far as rotaries, there's multiple ones. There's this one. Again, these do take up a lot of real estate on the desk. They really do. They're bulky, but I just want to show you something. This Fiskars track really isn't that much bigger. The only difference is, of course, this big arm, which is going to take up a little bit more room. Having a space for any trimmer on your desk is always a pain. So that's where I think we try to go towards littler. And then sometimes we want to go huge because we have big projects. I still haven't figured that out. That's where I'm saying there's no perfect trimmer in this world that exists, to me anyway. Okay, so the other thing about Fiskars that I want to talk about before I move on to the last 2 trimmers that I want to talk about. Fiskars has lifetime warranty. If something happens and your Fiskars is not cutting straight, they will replace it. Okay, so if you're not happy with how your Fiskars is working, talk to them. So what I like about the Fiskars is I keep one for crops. Okay, so when I have to travel, I find this perfectly good enough to get me through a weekend of cropping away at a craft event. The other thing is it's lightweight. The only thing that concerns me is this can sometimes pop off and go missing in my bag. That's the other thing about the guillotine and the rotary, is you're not searching for your tools. But I also can always have a score blade with me, so I don't necessarily need another extra tool to bring with me. One thing that I need to note, and I'm sure the store will be thrilled for me to tell you this, not all Fiskars blade replacements fit every Fiskars. They're not universal. So what you have to do is you have to flip over your Fiskars and check on the back. And it can be very, very hard to read. In fact, I'm going to try to find this, but I don't want to take up a significant amount of time. But what I need to do is find out, okay, it says on here, blade style 1 or T. Anyway, point is what I would actually do is that is really hard to read. So I would take, let's see if I can do this. I'm just going to do it with a highlighter right now and see if it works. No, it's better with ink. So what I'm going to do, you're going to do though, yeah, blade style T. So what you're going to do is you're going to flip over and see what blade style is marked on your Fiskars and make sure to pick up that blade style. Otherwise, you will run into troubles. Now, it's not to say that you can't get the trimmer to fit in here, but sometimes if it's just a little off and not the exact right blade for your trimmer, that could be one of the issues that you're dealing with, and why. Yes, Kim, I have a lot. Yeah, I have a lot of trimmers. I'm always trying the next best trimmer just to see if it's the one, right? So that's what I do, and that's what I am going to share all that I know about trimmers so that you guys can hopefully learn from me. Okay, so I will always keep a Fiskars on hand. That is another one that I will always have. So then finally, there's this lovely decal and the lovely all-in-one. Okay, so the question is, yes, so Kim's mentioning that she likes ones with the locking arm. So this one has a locking arm. So if you see there's the arm goes up. That's the other thing to think about, is how it loads. So this one actually goes like this and then locks down. Okay, most have some variant of some locking system to them. The only issue is, I'm going to talk a little bit about this one. I've noticed loves to fall off, even though this is probably the most versatile tool to take traveling. My only major complaint would be that this pops off super easy. But anyway, so you have the decal. Now the decal came out to create that edge. So if you have a stash of decorative scissors, you probably already have this one. It was pretty standard in the day to have the decal scissor that created this sort of old-fashioned vintage look decal edge. So if you remember those old photos back in the day that they had this, does a person need this decal? No, not really. I ended up buying it because I was working on a project for vintage, and I thought it would look, the stuff that I cut with it would look really good in my art journal. And what I found with, if you have the decal scissors, you could probably get away with it. But what I found with decorative scissors back in the day and still now is they're really hard to orient to get straight cuts. So if you remember our old scrapbooks, we'd always have these weirdo cuts going like this, and we tried to cut our photos. And wow, I'm really, really thankful that we've kind of moved away from those a little bit. But if you have the decal scissors, I'm not sure that you generally need to run out and buy this decal edge trimmer. I just wanted to bring it in as, hey guys, sorry, pardon me, as just something I wanted to show as an option. Of course, there's other trimmers on the market that aren't offered by our store that have tracks that kind of do different edges and stuff like that. If that's something you're into, that's cool. I'm here today about straight edges, so that's what we're going to keep talking about. All right, the all-in-one. Okay, so I'm going to be very honest about this all-in-one tool. I love it for lots of reasons. What I want to point out, though, is it probably deserves its own Crafty tool chat, because what is in this actual tool is, and for some reason or other, it must have fallen off just before I came on, maybe when it was in the big pile of trimmers, there is a stamping platform that fits here. This is a scoring board. There is, you change this to be whether it's a trimmer or a score board. So there's a bit of knowledge that could be very useful to how this one goes together. There is also a punch board and an envelope maker. There is on the back these things. Like, I don't even fully remember all that this does. So there's these thingers that you mount into here, and then you can do some twisty turny. Anyway, I'm convincing myself this needs its own Crafty tool talk. So for an in-depth look, we'll get to that in the future. But as a cutter, it is just your basic track tool. Okay, so you've got your trimmer on it. What you do is, if you're planning to cut, this is your track. And just like I was talking about with some of the other ones, you need to cut, you'll want to pull this out once in a while and make sure that this track is nice and clean. Because the minute you get gummed up with a bunch of paper, this blade is going to get grumpy and it's not going to do its job. Okay, so I'm going to pop this in like this. Right on here, that has more measurements. So in a way, even though this is the track, and like lots of times right in around here, you lose a couple measurements, like an 1/8 or a 1/4 inch, just because of the mechanism of the way it goes. That's okay. So this pops up like this, and then this is going to become your punch tools, but it's also the arm that goes up to a full 14 inches on your desk for measuring your paper. You also have, this would be 0, so where the cut happens, and you've got these great little measurements, which I will admit are a little bit hard to read, but you got up from 1/8 inch to 1 inch right there, right on this, that you can see really easily. And just put your paper down, and then what's going to happen is it's going to cut right there. Okay, much like other track tools, if I'm putting too much pressure one way or another, I can warp the plastic and create a problem with not having straight edges. So you need to kind of, I don't know, allow the blade to do its work and the track to do its work without adding extra pressure. If you're starting to kind of push it too hard, you can end up, again, I already said it, with off kilter, and you can also maybe even warp your tool, but these are pretty robust tools. I don't know that that'll actually ever happen. If I want to score, I'm going to take this and I'm going to flip it over, and now this becomes a guide for my scoring. I don't know if I've got this crate right. Okay, but what I will do is, this is no longer what I want to use. So I'm going to leave this off, and I'm going to grab this tool, so the tool that comes with it, and now I put this, actually, sorry, I know what I've done. Okay, so what I want to do is, this edge wants to sit here. So this is 0, and then that's 1/4 inch, and all of these markings at the top correspond with these scoring divots, I guess. So now I'm going to put this in and I'm going to load up. And if I want a 1/2 inch score, I'm just going to take my score tool, which is right here with my thing, and just run it along. And now I've got a score. And then of course I have, you know, if I want to do some quick stamping, I've got the stamper, I've got all sorts of things. So this is actually a really cool tool. Just going to say one drawback, and I think it's minor and easy to work around, is that if I'm stamping on this, so let's see if I can, I'm going to eyeball my ring for a second and see if I can see where that, I can't find it. So what would happen is your stamping platform would sit on here, and that's the piece that's sort of gone for a walk in my craft room here. Oh, found it! Okay, so this is it. So it sits on like that. And if I were going to put, so you put your stamp on here, same as you would for a stamping platform, put it here, and then you would stamp down. Okay, so the one thing that I have heard that a concern is that this is not a flat surface now. Does that mess with your stamping when you're pushing down? And then you have your paper here. Normally we like a little bit of a foam, or like in our Misties, I keep the Misty foam in there. Sometimes you need to shim up for different, another tool talk coming, don't worry. The lines from underneath, yes, that is the exact concern, is do you get lines from underneath? So what I will do is I will keep a backing of a chipboard from, words hard, a chipboard from a paper pad or just a little piece of chipboard, and I'll just have it there. And now I've covered those lines and I can use this as a nice clean. The other thing that I think might work, that's worth trying, but I haven't tried, but if you want to try and let me know, is one of those waffle flower grip mats. I think I would load that in, and then just, it would protect this stamping so it's a nice clean straight surface for me when I'm actually doing some quick stamping along the way. Okay. So if the question then becomes is, would this particular tool replace all other tools? Like, is this the one tool to rule them all? I'm still not sure. I'm going to be honest. I have not gotten rid of any of my punch envelope tag tools. Okay. I'm definitely not getting rid of my my Misty or any other stamping platform, because I still think this is the OG is the good one. What I enjoy about an all-in-one is that I can take this to a crop and have less tools. Every tool on here works extremely well. But I often find the original is always still the best. That's what I would say. So not to say that not to get it, just know that it might have a few limitations over having the original tools. Seems like it would be easier if you were stamping on a layout. Yes, that's a good point, Kim. Kim Monroe was mentioning that this would be easier to stamp on a 12 by 12 layout. That is huge and 100% true. So yeah, I can load this up with a big piece of paper and stamp somewhere up here on my paper. You know, just move my paper around. That is a big deal. That would be a huge deal, because if you already have this stamping platform, you don't necessarily want the Misty 12 by 12. It is huge. So this would definitely get you into being able to do that without getting yourself into too many expensive tools in your cabinet. Okay, so I'm pretty sure I have covered what I wanted to say about Crafty trimmers. And I've definitely gone longer than I thought I would. I thought it would be about 30 minutes. And we're sitting at around 45 minutes, but that's okay. So hopefully you appreciated and enjoyed this deep dive into paper trimmers. I am always looking for ideas on what future topics for Crafty Tool Talk will be. Some ideas that I have that I'm going to be covering in the future are the waffle flower grip mats. I'm going to cover the Spellbinders scoreboard. And I think it's pretty obvious that I'm going to need to do a really deep dive demo into this beautiful all-in-one tool so that we can see what it's capable of. Anyhow, continue to post some. Thanks, Kim. I hope to feel better soon. Anyway, if you would, please post some questions. I will continue to watch for those. And happy crafting, everybody. Bye for now.